Hello YouTube, this is Goth Bishop, and I bring to you Scary Story Time. About children's imaginary friends. Are they truly imaginary? Or are they very real? I have found stories from Reddit that claim these imaginary friends weren't so imaginary. But I shall leave that up to you to decide. Let's go. Story 1. Imaginary friend stayed around for generations. From Reddit user E.E. Greg. I talked to a boy named Kevin when I was a child. He came to visit me at my window every night, and we would play in my bedroom. Sometimes he stayed in my house too, instead of going back out the window. I very thoroughly described him to my parents before I grew up and no longer saw him. My brother and his family moved into our childhood home a few years back. Within the first month or so of living in my old bedroom, my 3-year-old niece described Kevin to my brother exactly, to a T. We've never told her, or any of the other kids, about Kevin. Previous to that, when I still lived in that house, my older niece asked us who the little boy in the hall was. She was the only child present. The hall is about a 3-foot space between my old bedroom and my brother's old bedroom and the bathroom. One space with 3 doorways. She was looking right into my room. So what do you all think? Is it an imaginary friend? Or is Kevin very real? Story number 2. Imaginary friend lived in a cemetery. From Reddit user Liberbot. My son, then about 2 or 3, used to tell us about his imaginary friend, Johnny, who wore all green, including a green hat. One time, we were driving by the cemetery and my son pointed out the window and exclaimed, "That's where Johnny lives!" He was very little and didn't know what a cemetery was, so we explained to him that no one lives there. It's a place for people who died. That's when he told us that Johnny was a soldier who died in a place called Nam. Do you believe it was an imaginary friend? Or that it was truly a soldier from Vietnam who was named Johnny? Let me know down in the comments. Story number 3. Imaginary friend liked to play in the basement. From Reddit user JJubJub. Around the age of 5, I used to play with toy cars and build tracks in my grandmother's basement, all while talking to some girl named Stephanie, who was my imaginary friend. She had long brown hair, brown eyes, always wore white, and she never seemed to leave the basement from what I could remember, but she was really nice to me and always wanted to play with the cars too. One day, my family asked me to come upstairs, and when I did, they asked who I was talking to. When I told them her name and gave a description, everyone in my house fell pretty silent and, for lack of a better word, looked like they'd seen a ghost. They told me my uncle used to play with an imaginary girl with that name and description when he was my age too. Needless to say, I didn't understand it at all at the time and told them she wasn't imaginary. Still kinda weird to this day though. What do you think? Is Stephanie imaginary? Or is she a ghost that is very real? Let me know in the comments. Story number 4. Imaginary friend picked the baby up and turned off the lights. From Reddit user Professor_Dog. When my son was first learning to talk, he would tell us about something called Purple Mommy. It could be an imaginary friend, but these details are a little bit creepy. Purple Mommy is all purple with long hair and bright, all white eyes. At the time, he mixed up purple with black, so he could have meant she was all black. Purple Mommy picks him up at night and turns off the lights. We would often find my son out of his crib in the morning, which would mean him crawling over the railing and to the ground at a time when he was barely walking. Definitely found the lights in his room off a few times too, even though he's terrified of the dark. Purple Mommy needs a bandage because she has blood everywhere. Purple Mommy has no smile, meaning a mouth. Purple Mommy can take her head off, and Purple Mommy really doesn't like Daddy. He told us all of this stuff for maybe a year or a little more. If we ever asked where she was, he'd always point to the same spot, a corner of the room behind his open closet door. He would also wake up crying almost every night during this time. Once, during a really rough night, My wife went to ask him what's wrong, and his answer was, "Purple Mommy won't let me sleep." What do you think about this one? Is Purple Mommy all in his imagination? Was Purple Mommy something different and very, very real? Story number 5. Imaginary friend looked identical to him. From Reddit user uwu_senpai Satan. So this is actually my story of when I was a kid. I had an imaginary friend named Derek, who was a carbon copy of me. We were completely identical. I played with Derek for years, longer than what normal kids do, but he would always look at my mom and older sister with a sense of sadness. Eventually, he went away. 23 years later, I'm digging through my mom's safe to grab some paperwork she's kept for me, and I see a stillborn death certificate for a boy named Derek, who shared my birthday. It was only then I found out I was actually a twin, and my twin, Derek, died during birth. Creepy, right? I'll go ahead and say, I don't think this one's an imaginary friend. Sad story, too. Story number 6. Imaginary friend always wore her wedding dress. From Reddit user Illogical Futurity. I have a younger relative who used to talk about her imaginary friend, Miss Mim. Miss Mim looks down on everyone, not because she's arrogant, but because she is always floating high up on the ceiling. Miss Mim is always wearing her favorite white dress and holding a big clear towel, a wedding dress and veil. Miss Mim's neck is always bent. Miss Mim cries a lot. Miss Mim hates our grandma. When we mentioned this to Grandma, she told us she had a friend who hanged herself in her wedding dress after her groom left her at the altar. Not so imaginary, huh? Story number 7. Imaginary friend shared his same name. From Reddit user, Does It Feel Bad? When I was little, it was pretty firmly established that I had an imaginary friend named Ether. Ether had the same name as me, so I just called him Ether. I would tell my mom that Ether was being mean to me and wants to steal Dad's bike. I remember I told my father that Ether was very mad at him for hurting me. He was an abusive piece of work, and he literally threw me across the room. I asked my mom about it as an adult, and she told me my father had a brother that I was named after, and wasn't told about because shortly before I was born, he died in a motorcycle accident. Was this purely coincidental, or was it the spirit of his uncle? Let me know what you think. Story number 8. Imaginary friend always had a stomachache. From Reddit user Helena_Lang. My sister had an imaginary friend when she was little called Aster. She said she named Aster herself. She didn't know what her real name was because Aster never told her. Aster was a little girl. She had long blonde hair and blue eyes. She wore a blue dress with lace on the top. She never wore shoes. Okay, sounds great. She was pale. She was always tired. She often said her stomach hurt. Aster has lines coming from her eyes. Aster's eyes are blurry. Granted, it was strange, but Aster seemed like a reasonably normal imaginary friend to me. Maybe just a little bit weird. But hey, kids are weirdos and come up with weird things, right? Until I was reading up on the history of our area and came across a story about a little girl who died of typhoid a long time ago. There was a photo of the family, including the little blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl. And I was like, hold the heck up. So I looked it up, and yep, lethargy and stomach aches are symptoms of typhoid. Cue me having a mini heart attack. My sister was a good bit older at this point, and she never brought up Aster anymore. Never showed her the photo or asked for more details about Aster because, frankly, I don't want to know. So is Aster an imaginary friend? Or is she the ghost of that girl? Story number 9. Imaginary friend got her own bed to rest in. From Reddit user Jake_Kiger. When my daughter was really young, she had an imaginary friend named Dee Dee. If she'd wake up in the middle of the night, she'd strip her bed and build a pile of her blankets and pillows in our room and wake up in her nest. When she was 5 years old, we moved into a new house built in the late 1800s by cattle rancher Jesse Driscoll. In the new house, she started building the piles in her own room, but she'd wake up on her stripped bed. When asked, she insisted that the nest was for her friend Rose. We asked her if Rose was friends with Dee Dee, and she'd say, "No, Rose is real." She would tell us about Rose waking her up at night and wanting to rest, so she'd build a nest for her on the floor and go back to bed. Years later, a sweet old neighbor, a grandniece of the Driscoll family, told us that Jessie had a first wife who had died in the house of sepsis poisoning. Her name was Rose. So, was Rose the imaginary friend? Or was it the spirit of Jessie's first wife? Story number 10. Imaginary friend had mean cats that lived in the wall. From Reddit user, Feature Impressive. So, my son had an imaginary friend, Bored. I can only ever imagine my son asking his name and the friend saying, "I'm bored." Anyway, he met him when he moved to an old house. The friend was unnerving at best, had mean cats, and lived in the wall. Sometimes he would like Bored, other times he would tell us he was mad at Bored because he was being mean and not letting him sleep. Sometimes Bored would lock the door to his room and let no one in or out. It was freaky stuff, but for the most part he liked playing outside with him, except for when Bored would try to get him to play in the road. Fast forward some time later, we are walking past the cemetery by our house, and he walks in there, points to a circle of trees, I'm talking 5 or so at least 8-foot tall trees, and says, "That's where Bored is from." I look in between these trees, and lo and behold, a gravestone is inside, absolutely covered by these trees and vines, but still just barely visible. We moved soon thereafter. Bored did not follow. What do you think? An imaginary friend from coincidence? Or is Bored a ghost? Alright YouTube, that'll conclude this video. I hope you liked Scary Story Time. It wasn't my favorite, but we'll see what you think. So, I'll see you in the next video. And this has been Goth Bishop, and I am out.